Tim Street. Tim's the coordinator for ICAN, the international campaign against nuclear weapons, and he's based in London just now. He's working closely with, particularly with us in Scotland and other parts of the UK. And this is an issue that we have been working on, and we are hoping to take this up and see if we can get, in the course of the next year or so, we can get the Scottish Parliament to give support to this. Tim, thanks.
Hi everyone. So my name's, as I've been introduced, I'm Tim Street. I work for ICAN UK, so that's the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And my job really is to try and get the UK government to support a nuclear weapons convention. So basically today I'm going to talk to you a bit about what a nuclear weapons convention is, what my kind of job entails, what I'm trying to do, what the UK government's position on a nuclear weapons convention is, and prospects for the future in terms of international disarmament. Okay, so to begin with, just to talk a bit about ICAN. ICAN was basically set up a few years ago to kind of push internationally for a nuclear weapons convention. And a nuclear weapons convention was first really put forward at the United Nations in around 1997 by Costa Rica and Malaysia. And so every year since then it's been put forward at United Nations General Assembly meetings. And every year it gathers around about 130 to 140 states out of the 190 nations in the world who support it. Now, a nuclear weapons convention is supported, or global abolition treaty, basically, to get rid of nuclear weapons, is supported by 2/3 of governments and peoples from around the world. So it has a massive international support, and this includes support from nuclear-armed countries such as China, India, and Pakistan. Okay, so in terms of the nuts and bolts of what a nuclear weapons convention is, just to start really simply and basically. So basically, a nuclear weapons convention it's a worldwide treaty which would basically outlaw nuclear weapons. It makes them illegal, it bans them completely and irreversibly, and basically kind of puts together a kind of structure, a process whereby they can be eliminated and verified, so you guarantee that they're gone. It's not something that's like, there is a model, a draft nuclear weapons convention out there, which is what these states have voted on. But basically, that's just a draft. It's up for states to come together, not just the US and Russia, as we've seen with other kind of agreements during the Cold War, i.e. bilaterally. It's really about all the nations of the world coming together, nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, to agree this. And so it's kind of a process to get negotiations going to begin. And basically, ICAN wants negotiations to begin in 2015. That's kind of what we're going for at the moment, or as soon as possible, to get the ball rolling to achieve this complete ban. Okay, so in terms of what would be banned, it would ban it would make illegal the development, testing, production, stockpiling, transfer, use, or threat of use of nuclear weapons, and ban the production of fissile materials used to make nuclear weapons, and also require states to destroy the delivery vehicles, i.e. the missiles, that can be used for nuclear weapons. Basically, how it would work would really be through a kind of step-by-step process in terms of getting from the kind of 23,000 or so nuclear weapons we have in the world to zero. And clearly this is kind of going to be a difficult process involving confidence building between states and raising belief that this is can be done essentially between states. So to begin with, obviously, like the fact that the US and Russia have 96% of the world's nuclear weapons, they need to make the biggest cuts to begin with. And by doing this, by getting the ball rolling, then you draw in those other states like China, France, for example, and the United Kingdom to get to zero. Obviously, at the same time, there's nothing wrong with the UK getting the ball rolling itself and getting to zero to begin with. So yeah, there's different ways of achieving it. Okay, but in terms of the kind of step-by-step process of doing this, there's like a clear kind of series of steps that the UK and other nuclear weapon states can do practically to climb down the nuclear ladder from where we are now, from like the completely stupid and dangerous situation, an unnecessary situation where Russia and the US have thousands of nuclear weapons on high alert that could be launched in minutes, which is beneficial for no one, and a complete hangover from crazy mutually assured destruction doctrines and policies from the Cold War. So, for example, they'd start with, the US and Russia would start with taking their nuclear weapons off high alert, removing the warheads from their missiles, and then storing them safely ashore. And then the United Nations, or another kind of disarmament body, would really be there to verify the process and control these materials. This would also help in terms of reducing the threat from terrorism, obviously, and the idea of a nuclear, a terrorist getting hold of a nuclear bomb. Obviously, people might have seen the report in The Guardian last week about this kind of the interception of nuclear materials, uranium on the Georgian border. And this is because obviously after the end of the Cold War, there are lots of kind of like fissile materials, radioactive materials that are out there and now spread around the globe. So there are steps being taken to secure these materials, and the Nuclear Weapons Convention would ensure that, make it much more difficult for terrorists to get hold of nuclear weapons or steal them, because it would be really securing and making sure these facilities are protected and secure. In terms of the UK, what we would really take, first of all, in terms of stepping down this nuclear ladder and getting to zero, ICAN calls for the UK government to give a binding legal assurance that would never use nuclear weapons first and would never use them against non-nuclear weapon states, and then give a no first use guarantee to states, a no first use policy. Then we should obviously make plans to not replace Trident and bring our submarines back to harbour, take the warheads off them, store them safely ashore, and then begin the process of scrapping the submarines and all these other kind of things. And that's kind of interesting if you think about it in those terms, because obviously we've kind of not really touched on the idea of the jobs argument yet. But one thing to say about this is in terms of like verifying and guaranteeing disarmament and other this kind of process, it will require a lot of work, obviously. So, for example, when people say, we'll lose a lot of jobs through getting rid of nuclear weapons, you can say, obviously, lots of people will necessarily have to be employed in getting rid of nuclear weapons and dismantling them. A lot of people are already employed in America at the warhead disassembly plants in actually taking apart the kind of kit, essentially, and then also going around making sure people are disarming these kind of things. So that's something to think about in terms of how people in these establishments could be gainfully employed, and obviously their expertise will be really valuable in kind of making sure and verifying that nuclear weapons are dismantled and safely put away. The UK, for example, already has an initiative with Norway on verifying warhead dismantlement, so those kind of things could continue, but obviously be massively expanded and need massive investment. So that, again, as we've heard from Alan, the 100 billion that's currently spent on replacing Trident, we should be spending maybe not exactly similar amounts, but we do need to spend a lot of money. Also, we could invest in disarmament, essentially, as I know some of you heard from the New Zealand delegates earlier this year in their meeting at the Scottish Parliament. New Zealand have a Minister for Disarmament Affairs. So, for example, a Ministry for Disarmament could be set up in the UK to get these things going. These aren't ridiculous or unprecedented things. These have been accomplished elsewhere, for example in South Africa, which got rid of its nuclear weapons and disarmed them. So there are strong precedents for this. Okay, the other thing to say really about, I guess, is a nuclear weapons convention, obviously, and we're getting rid of nuclear weapons. It's what a lot of people obviously today want. It's kind of like, to an extent, it's flavour of the month. You've heard a lot of US politicians talking about it. You've heard Obama talking about it, for example, and that's really given the cause some momentum. Obviously, you want to turn the rhetoric into reality, and also say, okay, it's a great idea, it's a great kind of goal, which we really want to push towards. But we also have to say, if we don't do this, what is the alternative? And for example, one of the two things could happen if we don't really push for zero and get rid of our nuclear weapons now. I mean, firstly, the fact that the UK is planning to replace its nuclear weapons and still places a great value on its nuclear weapons, not only deploying them at sea continuously, investing £700 million over the next 5 years in them. Obviously, it spends about £2 billion or so a year just on the infrastructure. It not only threatens insecurity in the world, just the fact that they're weapons of mass destruction, but they do give the incentive to other states to say, okay, if the UK values them and still invest in them, why shouldn't we? So it does perpetuate insecurity and uncertainty, and could lead to proliferation around the world. So now is the time, now is the window of opportunity to really say, okay, we really need to step down the nuclear ladder and take
and like say we don't value nuclear weapons anymore, that they're not part of our security. So three issues I want to raise in terms of why nuclear weapons haven't been got rid of at the moment, and how maybe a nuclear weapons convention could deal with them. So I've mentioned to you before that like 2/3 of publics and governments everywhere support the idea of a global abolition treaty. Three kind of barriers to this being achieved so far in history, stretching back to when nuclear weapons first got going and the opposition movement to them. Obviously, the United Nations was actually created in order to get rid of nuclear weapons to an extent. Is, as Alan said, you know, there has been like a public movement, a public awareness, and like opposition to nuclear weapons, but we need now to deepen the resistance and deepen the ambitions of getting rid of these weapons of terror. We need to say, okay, now we need to go all the way. The NPT has been useful in stopping proliferation. We've had other kind of treaties like the Partial Test Ban Treaty and so on that have led to reductions, but now we need to really push all the way and get to zero. And the other problem is that governments still have, I've mentioned it before, identify with them in terms of security, so we need to really say now is the time, as a lot of people are coming to realise, even within the military, that they're militarily useless, and they're really like just there for like political value to keep Britain at the top table, and don't really deal with any of our security threats but exacerbate them.